has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran of the NYPD, retired out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad. Today, there is some breaking news, if you haven't already heard it on one of the news stations. A secret grand jury has indicted Bryan Kohberger for 4 counts of murder first degree, in addition burglary. But this means this is a big deal because this means the preliminary hearing scheduled for June 26th, there's now no need for that. He's already been indicted. So the hearing where the judge would hear of evidence and determine this probable cause hearing, the grand jury has returned the true bill and indicted him for 4 counts of murder as well as burglary first degree. So he's being charged with the stabbing deaths of Ethan Chapin, Zayna Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. This is a really big deal. I think strategically it was probably good strategy by the prosecution. All these hearings, which just made them sort of show their hand to the defense and releasing all of the evidence that they had in regards to this. And now they won't have to release all this evidence. This evidence was, and not all of it, enough of the evidence was presented. And we say a secretive grand jury. A grand jury sits in secret, and they don't, well, if the prosecutor determines to release the fact that there was a true bill, which means an indictment, that is up to the prosecutor, and it has to be, doesn't have to be done immediately, but obviously they released the fact this grand jury could have been sitting for a while. I believe certain news stations with their sources close to the investigation broke this, that there was a secret. How secret is it if they're breaking it with some mole on the inside? Anyway, there was an indictment. And this is a big deal. This is really a big deal because it changes the scope of this. And it's really strategic in a lot of ways because the defense was making a lot of strategic moves. And now here's a strategic move made specifically by the prosecution. This was ABC News reporting on this.
Grand jury has indicted the suspect in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students. The Lata County District Court clerk tells ABC News the grand jury returned a multi-count indictment against Bryan Kohberger, including 4 counts of first-degree murder. He's accused of stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death in an off-campus home. ABC's Kana Whitworth has been tracking this story for us. She joins me now along with ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer for more. Kana, how significant is this indictment?
Well, look, Diane, it's huge. This is really the first step in the legal process. And this grand jury indictment now forgoes the preliminary hearing that we all had marked on our calendars for the end of June. So we heard this morning from the Latah County District County Clerk, again, confirming that a grand jury in Moscow, Idaho, has returned a multi-count indictment against Bryan Kohberger. And that includes murder in the first degree, of which he was facing 4 counts. You also have to remember he was facing that felony burglary count as well for entering a home, breaking into a home with the intent to commit murder. So what happens with this grand jury is that the jurors don't actually determine guilt here, right? They just are determining the probable cause to see if this will go to trial. So when he enters his plea, if that plea is not guilty, then a trial date will be set. And it's also important to keep in mind here that with this grand jury, it doesn't have to be a unanimous decision. And you have to think about the prosecution making this decision here. When this happens, it means that the prosecutor, their entire team is in there with just the judge and the grand jury and their witnesses. And we know how delicate the witnesses could be in this case when we're talking about these 2 surviving roommates, one of them who had been recently subpoenaed by the defense but also the surviving roommate who we read about in this probable cause affidavit, who claims she saw a man dressed clad in black, remember, with a mask covering nose and mouth, and she made out those bushy eyebrows, which is what eventually authorities say led them to Bryan Kohberger. So again, Diane, this is huge, but it is the first step in this court case.
You know, folks, some of the things that we've spoken about as we've covered this case from the beginning, actually, is the evidence and some of the evidence that we don't know about. And what if Dylan Mortensen can absolutely sit on the stand and say, the man that I saw that night dressed all in black, wearing that sort of what was described as a COVID mask, I'm sure it was Bryan Kohberger. And that would be such powerful testimony. However, I'm sure the defense, of course, would try to impeach her and, what was the lighting like? Where were you standing? How close was he to you? How could you identify someone with a mask? But if she is able to, with great authority, say that the man that walked past me that night is Bryan Kohberger, that is very, very powerful evidence. And I'll speak about some more of the evidence as I play a little bit more of little news bit from ABC News.
Brian, why go through a grand jury in a case like this?
Yeah, so Diane, the prosecution has to prove to the court, or more specifically the judge, that there's probable cause. And so you can either do it through a grand jury or in a preliminary hearing. And that's the initial step of moving a case towards an ultimate goal, either a plea or, more likely in this case, a trial. Here, the grand jury is not deciding guilt or innocence, as we heard earlier, and they're not deciding guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, as we know typically happens in a trial. Instead, they're deciding whether it's a 51% chance, or more likely than not, or the legal term being preponderance of the evidence, that Bryan Kohberger, in fact, committed these crimes, and that's what they seem to have decided. The prosecution decided to go with the grand jury rather than preliminary hearing, probably because that limits the amount of exposure information going to the defense, but also the public. And this allows the prosecution to marshal the evidence without the defense cross-examining any witnesses.
Kana, what happens with this case from here?
So what we're hearing right now is that he will be arraigned officially on Monday morning.
Folks, there's some breaking news. He will be arraigned Monday morning at 9 a.m. in Latah County. So this is the first, well, not the first, but it's encouraging that the case is going to move forward, and he either pleads guilty or not guilty. If he pleads not guilty, a date is set for the trial, and all the legalness will proceed. And, you know, as we said numerous times, there's a good chance that they will put this case off until September, because it seems that almost no courts go to trial in the summertime. I could be wrong, but from my experience, I think they will put this case off until September. But you heard it, that he is going to be arraigned Monday morning. That's 5/22/23 at 0900 hours, or 9 a.m. for you non-military folks.
In Latah County at 9 a.m. in this courthouse. He'll have to make an in-person appearance. At this point, he will enter a plea. In all likelihood, people expect that plea to be not guilty. You have to remember that back when he was arrested in Pennsylvania, he immediately waived his right to extradition. He said he quickly wanted to return to Idaho so that he could quickly be exonerated. So that is the first step. And then there will be a trial set after that, Diane.
All right, Kana Whitworth, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both.
So that's the most breaking news we've had on this case since all the rumor, the innuendo. Remember, May 25th, there was supposed to be a hearing with the judge in regards to the gag order. Could the gag order have pushed the prosecution, and also the requests for all kinds of evidence by the defense? Could that have pushed the prosecution to say, you know something, we're going to strategically come across with our own sort of strategy, and we're going to impanel a grand jury, and then all this discovery material they're not going to receive all of it because what we're going to present to the grand jury is going to be secret. The defense will still have to receive the discovery material, but in what timely fashion? When will they receive it? That is the big question. When will they receive the discovery? And that we don't know. And many things we wanted to talk about here in regards to evidence, because I intended to come on today and talk about the 20,000 pieces of evidence that the prosecution turned over to the defense. And how is it possible, again, for the defense to go through that voluminous amount of evidence? Some of the evidence, obviously, they had 9,200 tips calls. From my experience in working in the Detective Bureau in the NYPD for 16 years, my last 10 years in homicide, and working basically every major case that that my team was working, when some of the ones we weren't working, we were pulled in Manhattan North. Most tips, bear no fruit, So does that mean, but every single one of them has to be entertained. So that is something that the defense can create doubt with. What happened to tip number 5,273? It says no results. What does that mean, no results? That's why it's important that a detective goes out on every single tip and writes a report that either backs up the tip, yeah, this is what we found out, or eliminates the tip, no, this information was not good. A detective that writes no results or negative results is a poor detective, all right? And that happens to be a fact. The detective has to do good enough paperwork that when it does go to a trial like this, could you imagine 9,200 tips? And probably 98% of them are not, they bear no fruit whatsoever. But if the prosecution doesn't investigate every one of these tips, the defense could say, how do you know this tip that's saying, I know who did it and his name is blah, blah, blah. If you didn't check that out, could they not create doubt? Detective, why did you not go investigate this guy? The tipster told you he did it, and he saw the knife he used, and all of those things are so important. And we talk about crossing T's and dotting I's. That's what it's about. That is what all of that stuff is about. And the evidence in this case, we spoke about it, circumstantial evidence. How powerful is circumstantial evidence? And we defined it a million times. Circumstantial evidence from which inferences are drawn. That doesn't mean that the person did it, but if there's, and I always use this exaggeration because it tends to prove my point. If there's 3 tractor trailers full of circumstantial evidence, that's pretty damn powerful evidence, wouldn't you say? And after a while, if it's pointing to the same person, then that evidence can be very, very strong. People are going to make a big deal out about, and we saw it all along in this case, Bryan Kohberger's, his personality, whether he had it in him to do the crime charged. What is it? It's not typical for a PhD student to do a quadruple murder. It's not typical for anyone to do it, but we look back in the history of serial killers, and you have someone like Ted Bundy, who was attending law school, and thus far, there's no evidence that Bryan Kohberger is a serial killer. In fact, up to this point, he has not been convicted, so he's innocent until proven guilty. So we look at his mannerisms, we look at the way he acts, we look at the way he speaks, and of course, the evidence that really brought us here, the beginning evidence, and this case hit so many peaks and so many valleys. And the big piece of evidence was, of course, the white Hyundai Elantra, which in the beginning we were all like, oh, there's thousands of Hyundai Elantras. But we didn't know, they didn't release the fact that that specific Hyundai Elantra was seen on video pulling into the backyard of 1122 King Road, which is the house in question where the murders took place. Not just was it seen pulling in on at least 3 occasions and backing up, coming back, pulling out. That was what initially was the evidence we all heard, and the police reported to us as, we're interested in speaking to this person as a witness. And I knew that when Chief Fry said that, I knew that was the perp, that was why they were looking for him. This was not a witness they were looking for, because it was so important. It was the biggest piece of evidence they had back then. And we all of us have watched this case from the beginning, and we know the peaks and valleys. We know the finger pointing. We know the craziness. We know even the news, the broadcast news reporting garbage on this case, and it's sad because what it really comes down to is evidence and professionalism with police, investigators, prosecutors, and of course also defense attorneys who are representing this defendant, who again is innocent until proven guilty. This was the report that News Nation did on last night, and allegedly, and I don't know if this is true because I just picked this up today, was that News Nation broke this with their secret squirrel inside the investigation.
At this hour, a grand jury we've learned has indicted Bryan Kohberger. He's the suspect in the Idaho quadruple stabbings. What this means is the grand jury reviewed some evidence and testimony and found enough evidence to indict. I want to bring in News Nation national correspondent Brian Enton now. Brian, this just happening overnight. What more are you hearing about what led up to it and what this means for his case?
Yeah, this is a big deal, Marnie. This means that behind the scenes, a secret grand jury has been convening for quite some time, going over all of the evidence in the Kohberger case presented to them by the prosecution, and they have decided to indict him on the charges with the murders connected to the 4 victims in Moscow, Idaho. This was first reported overnight by News Nation's Ashley Banfield. We were all anticipating this preliminary hearing that was going to be coming up next month, where we were expecting to hear from witnesses and a lot more information. That preliminary hearing will now not be happening, Marnie.
Folks, I mentioned earlier and on the ABC News report, and the same thing on the indictment of Bryan Kohberger by a grand jury for 4 counts of first-degree murder and for burglary first degree. I mentioned earlier the hearing, of course, for June 26th is now off because there's no need now for a probable cause hearing. In addition, May 25th, that the hearing that many news organizations have filed papers against the gag order, that will still go on. That's on May 25th. That has nothing to do with Bryan Kohberger's arraignment. But the June 26th hearing, the probable cause hearings that was slated to take up to 5 days, that's off now. So I did mention, if you're a late arrival today, this Monday, May 22nd, 2023, at 0900 hours, that's 9 a.m., Bryan Kohberger will be arraigned. At that arraignment, he will formally plead innocent or plead guilty. Again, if he pleads guilty, that'll open up the window for the trial to proceed, and it'll be determined by the defense and the prosecution, as well as the judge, how much time they need to prepare. Don't forget, the defense has already had 6 months to prepare their defense for this case. So now this secret grand jury that was impaneled by the Latah County prosecutor, they came back with a true bill, which means an indictment. No longer is there a need for a probable cause hearing. So again, this Monday at 9 a.m. in Latah County Court, Bryan Kohberger will either plead guilty or innocent, and if he pleads innocent, a trial date will be set.
Basically, this official indictment by the grand jury replaces the preliminary hearing. So now there is no need for the preliminary hearing. The grand jury, which is a group of members of the community, just like you'd see for a jury with a trial, they met in secret. The prosecution presented them with the evidence they have. They're also required, I believe, to present them with any exculpatory evidence. Sometimes witnesses, like detectives, will also testify to a grand jury. So it's quite a process. Presented them with all of that, and they voted to officially indict.
You know, folks, most prosecutors, again, they don't want to show their whole hand at a grand jury. So they present as little evidence as possible, but to make sure that they get a true bill, that they get a vote for an indictment. They don't want to show all their evidence. So they will present enough to give the grand jury probable cause. They will vote for what's called a true bill, which is an indictment that will allow the court process to proceed. So there's, again, the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, he's not going to give away his whole case at a grand jury. He's going to selectively release certain evidence, again, enough to get an indictment against this defendant. And apparently that's exactly what was done.
Bryan Kohberger. It doesn't mean that he's guilty. It just means that the charges will stand and that the case will move forward and that there won't be a need for a preliminary hearing. We believe that Bryan Kohberger will appear in court on Monday in Moscow, Idaho, and that is when he will officially have to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. Marnie?
And what, if anything, Bryan, are you hearing from the attorneys representing Kohberger?
So we are not hearing from them at this point. I think this is probably just becoming news to them too, because really all of this broke overnight. I mean, I get.
You know, I would imagine that the defense attorneys were the first to hear. Believe me, they didn't find out about this from News Nation. I would think after the prosecution got a true bill, got an indictment by the grand jury, that they would have alerted the defense to this so that they didn't have to find out through broadcast media or through the print media. So I think that would be a courtesy between attorneys that they would have been notified. So I would find it hard to believe that they were notified by the press.
Again, everyone involved in the case seemed to be anticipating this preliminary hearing. Everyone was preparing for it. We saw subpoenas and we knew that a lot was happening behind the scenes. But there was sort of this thought that the secret grand jury could be meeting and just no one knew about it because they meet in secret. No one knows except for the prosecution. And that is indeed what was happening. So I think all of this is just trickling out to the parties today. We haven't heard from the Kohberger side at this point.
And in terms of the evidence that the prosecution shared with the grand jury, any of that evidence yet made public, or is that also still secret, some of the evidence that they have?
Yeah, it is still secret, and it will remain secret. The transcript will remain secret to us, at least for now. I believe the defense will likely get it at some point. I'm not sure.
The defense will absolutely get the grand jury transcripts. Now that the indictment's out, there's no more secrets, you know? It's not secret anymore. The grand jury found probable cause. They voted to indict. That's called a true bill. The defense will get a copy of the grand jury transcripts, which will include the evidence that was submitted by the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson. So it's no longer a secret anymore. So all of these folks saying it's still a secret, it's not a secret. There will be transcripts. The defense will get the transcripts as part of the discovery. Miss Incognito, she asked a question. Sorry, is this good or bad for either side? Miss Incognito, you don't have to apologize. I believe this is better for the prosecution than the defense. I think this was probably somewhat of a surprise to the defense. I think they were probably looking forward to their 5 days of probable cause hearings so that they, there's a term in the court, in the courts, a fishing expedition. And basically a fishing expedition is when a defense goes and they want every bit of information that the prosecution has. And even though they're entitled to all of the evidence in discovery, inculpatory, exculpatory evidence, Um, when the prosecution gives it over isn't totally defined, because I guarantee there's a lot of evidence that the prosecution has not yet submitted to the defense. Now, might the defense find out about some of this evidence that was submitted to the grand jury that was not yet submitted to them? A good possibility.
Sure exactly what the law is in Idaho, but it's a secret process. We don't know what the grand jury was told by the prosecution, who may have testified. All of that remains secret. Likely today, the indictment will be unsealed, though. It won't have a lot of information about exactly what the grand jury heard, but it will basically clarify that, yes, he has been indicted by the grand jury. It'll lay out all the murder charges, and then we'll learn about the hearing that we have learned through Ashley Banfield sourcing that will be on Monday.
And Bryan, how will this impact the timeline of the trial? I know the trial date had been pushed back. When are we hearing that would maybe get underway?
You know, folks, I spoke about that before, and this, his arraignment on Monday at 0900 hours, 9 a.m., of course, Latah County time there. I guess Idaho would be Midwest time, I believe. They will decide based on what he does. If he enters a not guilty plea, then they have to set a date for the trial. Now, what the judge will do will ask both sides, the defense and the prosecution. And it also depends on what is the judge's schedule over the summer. Could that preclude the judge setting the date for the summertime? What is the defense's schedule? They have other cases besides this case, believe it or not. Well, probably not many, but could have other plans. So the defense and the prosecution, they would probably come to an agreement of, well, why don't we put this off to September? That, I've been saying that all along. That is my prediction. They will not go to trial in the summertime. I believe September could even be put off till October or November. It's not, the date is not etched in stone. It's agreed upon between the defense, the prosecution. Well, actually, if the judge sets a date, basically the defense and the prosecution must adhere to that. However, why would the judge be inflexible with the date set for trial, especially in a death penalty case, knowing that any reason could be used for an appeal? So I think the judge will be flexible in regards to the date set for this trial.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, that still hasn't been laid out. The feeling is, this trial could be a ways off. There's still a lot of behind the scenes back and forth as the defense tries to get a lot of discovery in the case, all of the evidence in the case. There is a tremendous amount of evidence in this case, photos and digital evidence and interviews that were conducted that the defense is still trying to get their hands on and go over. So the trial is a long way out. What's interesting, though, is we had such a focus on this preliminary hearing coming up at the end of June, Marnie. We were expecting to learn a lot more. There were going to be witnesses that testified. You remember the story about they were trying to get Bethany Funk.
I think what Bryan Enton just said is that, did you see, this preliminary hearing was going to be a media frenzy. You could hear how, they were almost salivating over this preliminary hearing because it would have included Bethany Funk testifying potentially, Dylan Mortensen testifying. Could this not be strategy by the prosecution? Say, no, they're going to testify at the trial. They're not going to be testifying at the hearing. And to ensure that, I'm going to present this case to a grand jury. And when that indictment comes back, which everyone fully expected there to be, then there will be no need for Dylan Mortensen and Ms. Funk to testify. And when they testify, it will be at a trial in the Supreme Court with a great deal on the line, the death penalty on the line. So again, he didn't want to, he didn't want this to become the circus that it would become. And the prosecutor, really, this was strategic, and he did it. Lula Morocco, thank you so much for the $110 super sticker. Psalm 110, the Lord says to my Lord, set up my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Wow. Very powerful. Lou, thank you so much for all your support. Very, very much appreciated. So the strategy in this case, I think that the prosecution the defense was filing all the motions. Now the prosecution just showed that, yeah, we're involved in this case too. And touche,
in to testify, one of the surviving roommates. We were expecting to learn a lot more at that hearing. That was going to be a big development. It was going to be public, which was a big deal because so much of this all has been secret because of the gag order. That preliminary hearing now does not happen. What I think is this means that we're going to, not have a lot of information for a long time as they continue to go over all the evidence behind the scenes.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation.
Folks, very interesting, right? And I think strategically what I said is definitely true. That now, look, the defense was asking for all kinds of things. They had over 20,000 pieces of evidence. Now, how long do you think it takes to go through 20,000 pieces of evidence? And surely the probable cause hearing, this 20,000 pieces of evidence was going to be brought up also, and they were going to speak to that. Digital evidence, cell phone evidence, cell site. The defense needs experts for digital evidence. If they're going to create doubt with digital evidence, they can't have John Q. telephone guy. They need a digital evidence expert to testify about cell sites, to testify about text messages. If there is social media involved in this, if in fact Bryan Kohberger did have contact with one of these victims prior to this occurrence, that has to be looked at. That has to be an expert. Supposedly either Madison Mogan or Kaylee Gonsalves, there's reports that there could have been, some digital evidence in regards to maybe Instagram or some type of interaction. That has yet to be confirmed because the prosecution has kept all of this secret. Again, the defense, if they're going to create doubt with that type of evidence, they have to have an expert. They just can't pull someone in off the street. Experts cost lots of money. Are they going to have the money to get these experts? Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime stories from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership. We count them 5 different levels, and we really appreciate our fans, our subscribers, our friends that are on our YouTube channel. And again, we really appreciate them. And again, the perspective of this is just, today I intended to go on and talk about the 20,000 pieces of evidence. And then it came out that, excuse me, my glasses are getting this glare. Sorry to annoy you guys with moving my glasses. Anyway, then it came out that the grand jury indictment occurred. And I thought from a strategic point of view, what a great move that was from Bill Thompson. And folks, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but he has 2 assistant prosecutors on this case. And they're deputy attorney general prosecutors. So they're from the state of Idaho. So very much experience with death penalty cases. And it's Jeff Nye and Ingrid Beatty. So the prosecution is prepared for this case. Now, is the defense as prepared? I think they better be, and let's see, someone said, the love of God, does the Dollars the governor added go to the search for evidence. Does defense get? I believe that the defense would have to get additional money from the legal aid fund since he has an illegal aid attorney to basically hire investigators, experts to give him an adequate defense because it's always alleged, and there's some truth to it, that the government has, unlimited money. It's not true it's unlimited, but they can exhaust the resources of a private citizen pretty easily. So that's one of the reasons that the state, we'll call the government the state, they want to be able to have enough money to prosecute, but yet they don't want to outshine the defense because it could be alleged that they're exhausting them, and the defense again you see the difference in the talent of attorneys when the person being accused is a multimillionaire and then they have all kinds of money. And is that fair? No, but it's not fair. No, but life isn't fair, and we always point back to the O.J. Simpson case. He had a team of attorneys: Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, names that you recognize as celebrity attorneys. And he had others. And he had the best investigators that money could buy. And did that also help him beat that case? Yeah, you bet it did. So, especially in a death penalty case, do we want any possibility that he could win on appeal or he could beat this case because they didn't do a proper job? Just think of all the evidence. Think of all the work that's gone into this case. Recently, when we had so many talking heads on over time on the different television stations talking about behavioral analysis and about his behavior and who he was, who he is, and examining his behavior. Will that come into play in this case? I believe it will. I believe they probably will bring in behavioral analysts. And we saw over the months some of the best and we saw some of the worst, on different TV stations. And I mean, I'm not going to point out who the best and worst are, but this Monday night at 9:00, I have Dr. Joni Johnston coming on, who is a PhD, of course, doctor, forensic psychologist, expert in serial killers, expert in behavioral analysis. She's coming on the show this Monday night. How timely for this, right? This Monday night at 9 p.m., Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. So it should be an outstanding show this Monday at 9. This has gotten a lot of views also. The video of Bryan Kohberger being pulled over a month before the murders occurred. Let's watch a little bit of this just to see what his personality is like.
Hello, I am Officer Loangus. Stops being audio and video recorded. Again, I think you know why I stopped you. You ran the red light.
What actually happened was I was stuck in the middle of the intersection.
Yeah,
so
I was behind you the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So technically, you're not supposed to enter the intersection at all for that reason, because if the light turns red, then you're stuck in the intersection, and then you run the red light. So that's the reason I stopped you. Do you have your license on you?
Yep.
Do you have the registration and insurance?
Let me just get this for you out.
You what?
I'm just going to get this out for you.
Okay.
So would you explain that to me a little bit further? So in Pennsylvania, when you're stuck in the intersection, you have to make the left. So what would the appropriate thing for me to have done been?
Not-
Just
You're
back up in
not
that
supposed to
situation?
block an intersection like that in Washington. So
So
just by you blocking the intersection, that's technically a ticketable violation. And then then you're running a red light. So it's another ticketable offense. So you're not supposed to proceed into the intersection until you can go. Because a lot of people do what you just did, right? Is like you're sitting in the intersection waiting and then turns, and then you're blocking. So
yeah, there was a little bit of confusion with speeding because someone had stopped. I wasn't sure what they were doing, and then they put on their light to turn.
Mhm.
So I thought that maybe they were letting me go through.
oh,
Did you see that?
no. Mm-mm.
Yeah, like right before I made the turn, there was someone who like made a right. And they didn't have their, their signal on, so I wasn't.
He's got his whole defense set up for the officer, and I find that a little bit, manipulative. Although anyone, I think, that gets pulled over for a traffic infraction, they're going to try to get out of it, unless they think there's absolutely no way. But he's trying to talk his way out of it.
Sure if they were just waiting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would just advise just don't enter the intersection until you can go so you don't get stuck. Let's see.
But in that situation, the best thing to do then would be back up. And not,
I don't know if there's a best
It's
thing
like
to do in that situation because you're either going to back up into somebody
Yeah.
or you're going to run a red light. So, or you're going to be sitting in an intersection.
Yeah.
There's not really a great option there.
yeah,
Mhm.
I was just slightly into the crosswalk. So,
Mhm.
where I'm from Pennsylvania, we
Mhm.
actually don't have like crosswalks.
Oh,
So even if
interesting.
you're kind of slightly, there's a little bit more leeway as well. Like there are a few.
First thing I would have said is, sir, this is not Pennsylvania. This is not Oz. This is Idaho. When you're in Idaho, you do as the Idahoans do. When in Rome, you do as the Romans. This is not Pennsylvania.
Lines. Like there's one white line and there's another one.
Mhm.
Like there's like a certain
Yeah.
margin from which you can actually kind of put your vehicle, place your vehicle.
hmm
Um,
Yeah. So I know laws vary state to state, but there is a law in Washington for blocking an intersection like that, proceeding through when you don't, when you're just stalling. I forget the actual verbiage. I can.
So it's not all that exciting. So I'm going to pull it off the screen. But you could see he was again trying to talk himself out, which is it's not a negative. Most people try to talk themselves out of a summons. But just for an aside, in New York City, it's called blocking the box. So if you pull into the intersection and traffic gets blocked from other blocks, gets blocked for several blocks, and you block the traffic going the other way because the light changes, if you get a summons for that, it's a red light summons. It's something called like blocking the box, and it's 2 points on your license. Besides, I believe it's like about $150 or $250 summons. So he may, someone actually said to me last week, "Oh, it's not right. He gets a red light summons for that. It's not blowing a red light. It wasn't his fault." Well, you don't pull into the intersection when it's backed up, and yeah, you could get caught to no fault of your own, but it's the law, So you can argue it, but you look at the families here too. Steve Gonsalves, he's been the face of the families, and he's on the screen right now. It's pretty sad to see what the families are going through here. And we've been watching this from the very beginning, and they didn't, of course, like that the gag order was put on, and to them, I think they wanted the freedom to speak about this case. However, the gag order precluded them also from speaking about it. Folks, if you're tuning in late, the breaking news was a Latah County grand jury indicted Bryan Kohberger for 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of burglary first degree. The grand jury is a secret process. So the probable cause hearing that was supposed to take place on June 26th will not be necessary now because he has been indicted, and that will take place of the probable cause hearing. So this is a big deal. This allows him this Monday, it's a Monday, 5/22/23 at 0900 hours. Someone just corrected me and said, I think it's Mountain Time. So it's 2 hours behind Eastern Standard Time. So their 0900 would be our 11 a.m., I believe. And he's going to be arraigned. And at that arraignment, he either pleads not guilty, he can plead guilty. If he pleads not guilty, which is expected, a trial date will be set by the judge. And again, we mentioned numerous times, this is a death penalty case, and that's one of the reasons why two death penalty prosecutors from the deputy state attorney generals from the Idaho State Attorney General's office will assist Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson in this case.
County Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall granted a motion from the state requesting additional help for the county prosecutor. Deputy Attorney Generals Jeff Nye and Ingrid Beatty will now work alongside Prosecutor Bill Thompson as they tackle the high-profile case against Kohberger. He faces murder charges in the brutal stabbings of 4 Idaho college students taking place at an off-campus home in November. The case is still in its early stages as Kohberger sits in the Latah County Jail awaiting his preliminary hearing, which is set for late June. That hearing will determine whether or not Kohberger's case will actually go to trial. And when
Again, guys, that hearing now is all academic. That hearing is not going to happen because a secret proceeding by a Latah County grand jury has returned a true bill, which of course is an indictment of Bryan Kohberger. He will be arraigned on Monday at 0900. That's in Latah County Court.
whether he'll have to submit a plea. Let's break it down. Terry, the judge issued a gag order in this case, which the Idaho Supreme Court upheld this week. What's the purpose?
So this is old news about the gag order and all of that stuff, but it's interesting that to look at this case and to go back on this case to see all the different legal moves that have been made in this case. And now that may be why the prosecution said, well, you know something, let me present this case to a grand jury, because it was reported yesterday, 20,000 items of evidence has been turned over to the defense in regards to this case. So think of 20,000 pieces of evidence, whether it's digital evidence, physical evidence. One thing I said earlier, and if Dylan Mortensen, who was one of the roommates downstairs, if she can say that, and I'm not putting words in her mouth or predicting that she could say this, but if she could say that I'm sure, or I'm 90% or 100% sure, 90% won't sell it, but if she could say, I'm sure that the individual who walked by me that early morning on November 13th is one and the same as the defendant in this case, Bryan Kohberger, I'm going to ask you guys, how powerful of evidence is that? Ridiculously powerful, right? But I don't know if she can or will say that. But I think it also may have been strategic by Bill Thompson that he didn't want either one of the roommates, Miss Funk or Dylan Mortensen, to have to testify at the preliminary hearings and then have to be dragged back in to the trial. So that could have been one of the reasons that he presented it to a grand jury. And of course, we know grand jury's proceedings are secretive. They don't have to, he doesn't even have to tell the defense that a grand jury has been impaneled. The grand jury could have found out right after the indictment came down. And I would think that prosecutor Bill Thompson would have given a heads up to the defense via phone call, let let them know that the grand jury has, in fact, returned the true bill and indicted Bryan Kohberger. I can't believe that the defense would find out by the news. I just don't think that would happen that way. So again, I think that this was strategic on behalf of the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, and I think that it gives him now somehow the advantage over the defense that he's presented this. Mary Michael just got it. Foo will watch replays. 20,000 pieces of evidence. OMG. Oh my God. Get out of the coffee pot. I think you missed a lot of important stuff this afternoon. That's okay, Mary Michael. You can just watch it on the rerun. But 20,000 pieces of evidence, some of it can be inculpatory evidence. Some of it can be exculpatory evidence. The thing is that the prosecution, when they turn all of this evidence over, including 9,200 tips. Remember early in this case, they had a tips line open and they got 9,200 tips. And I said earlier on in the show, when I was in the homicide in Manhattan North, we would have major cases where we would open up a tips line. And every single one of those tips had to be investigated. So if it was a major case, sometimes you'd have 100 detectives. And I would sometimes be the one with the tips log and grabbing a detective who may be from a different squad in the city and say, officer or detective, excuse me, I want you to go to this address in the Bronx and speak. And I got to tell you this story because it was funny. If you don't know New York City, the uptown precincts, Harlem, 3-2, the 2-8, 2-5, 2-3, 3-4, 3-3, 3-0. The precincts uptown, they have a reputation as being busy, violence, rocking precincts. And we had a case where an NYPD police captain was shot in the 3-2 precinct in Central Harlem. And we had a tips log. And I was sending out detectives on the tips. And, we're getting hundreds of tips. So I have my head buried in the tips log. And I said, detective, I didn't even lift my head up. I go, detective, I want you to go to this address in the Bronx. This tip alleges blah, 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 blah. And I lift my head up and the detective has this look of fear, like absolute fear on his face. And I said, what's the matter? He goes, I can't go to the Bronx. He goes, he worked at some squad. I'm not going to give up the squad because I don't want to disparage the squad. He worked at some squad in Manhattan South that's known to have great restaurants and great places to go. I'll put it that way. And he was terrified of going to the Bronx. And I was like, dude, you're kidding me, right? You're a New York City detective. You're afraid to go to the Bronx? Look at your shield. What does it say? It doesn't say Midtown. It says New York City. So I actually said, I go, forget about it. Go make me a cup of coffee. I tell that story. I thought it was funny, but the fear that overcame his face because he was going to the Bronx. And it was like, I just, every once in a while, we needed a little levity. I thought I would tell you guys that story.
Based on details at the scene, we believe this was an isolated, targeted attack on our victims.
He's very quiet, calculated about what he says.
I want to see an innocent man, but I feel like he's just scared to look at me in the eyes.
If you plead guilty or found guilty, it is up to death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
The man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students will be back in court next week for a motion to compel discovery hearing. Now, Brian?
That is all out the window now, guys. As we know, the breaking news is he has been indicted by a grand jury. They returned the true bill. The hearing that was scheduled for next week is off. The June 26th, 5 days of probable cause hearings is off. He's been indicted. This Monday, he will appear in court at 0900 hours in Latah County to be arraigned.
And Kohberger's defense is asking the state to turn over evidence In response, the state listed all the discovery provided to the defendant, including 10,000 pages of reports, more than 10,000 photos, and approximately 9,200 tips. Now, in the filing, the defense claims certain reports may contain exculpatory information, but the state says in the motion response that the defense has not said what that information is, and if they know about it, the prosecution doesn't know about it, so let us know what it is. Kohberger faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in the November 2022 stabbing deaths. Steve Gonsalves, the father of victim Kaylee Gonsalves, told ABC News, quote, "I can't wait to see the evidence, and then I'm going to bring it. He's going to realize that this is the family that's going to make sure he doesn't get away with it." Several key pieces of evidence in this case surround Kohberger's actions after the murders. Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae reports.
Handcuffed and dressed in a red jail uniform, Bryan Kohberger, the PhD student, made his first appearance as a defendant in a Pennsylvania courtroom. He was arrested at home with his parents on.
Guys, obviously, this is going back to December when he was arrested, actually December 30th. So it's replaying some of this stuff. But the breaking news today, of course, is the grand jury indictment that occurred yesterday. And all of the things that we thought were going to occur are hearing next week. The probable cause hearings on June 26th. It's all academic now. It's not going to happen.
December 30th, wanted for the murders of Madison, Kaylee, Zaina, and Ethan, 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho.
I did not imagine the investigation would lead to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania State Police were asked for their help in his capture after Kohberger was identified as a suspect.
Mr. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident.
This news of his arrest came as a shock to the small community near the Poconos.
This place is known to be like a nice place, like it's a tourist place. It's the Mount Poconos. I mean, to hear this, it's so real for me. To be honest with you, it feels like a dream at this point.
Not only is the area better known for its scenic mountain getaways, it's more than 2,500 miles from the crime scene. Bryan Kohberger waived his right to an extradition hearing inside of this courthouse in front of a judge and a packed courtroom that included his family. That waiver.
Again, this arraignment, this was 6 months ago. And again, he will be getting rearraigned this Monday because of the grand jury indictment on 4 counts of murder first degree and 1 count of burglary first degree.
First started the process for his transport back to Idaho to face those 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Having read those documents and the sealed affidavits of probable cause, I definitely believe that one of the main reasons the defendant chose to waive extradition and hurry his return back to Idaho was the need to know what was in those documents.
Those documents are expected to reveal some of the evidence against Kohberger, including details about a white Hyundai Elantra the police say was in the vicinity of the victim's apartment around the time of the murders. Kohberger was driving a similar car when he was pulled over by Indiana police on December 15th. He was with his father on their way from Washington State back to their home in Pennsylvania. Kohberger was a graduate student at Washington State University in Pullman, the campus just minutes away from the apartment where the victims were slain.
In law enforcement, we understand the best thing we can do for victims and their families is to follow every lead, collect every piece of evidence, and bring those responsible to justice.
All right.
So, folks, again, if you've been following this case, is something for all the followers exciting that there has been a grand jury indictment. The probable cause hearing that was supposed to occur June 26th is not going to happen. The case is going to move forward. How quickly it will move forward, we can't say. The wheels of justice, as they say, spin very slowly. And we don't know, again, almost, I say the term ad nauseum, but the judge will decide what the date the trial should begin. and that potentially could happen Monday. And we spoke about how we don't think that that the case will go forward in the summertime. It very well could be put off till the fall, even as late as October and November. So this just means a lot of the legal finagling. Is that a New York word, finagle? The legal finagling will continue, and each side will be, strategically planning their case. So it's a bit. I think it's at least it forces something to happen. Folks, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York City area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe Murray is a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. Joe is a huge supporter of Police Off the Cuff, and he's a fantastic attorney, as I said. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or you can get his website at jmurray-law.com. Joe Murray will be in your corner. You give him a call if you need a defense attorney. So, guys, that's basically our show today. I didn't, I was going to go on and talk about all the evidence. And one of the things I wanted to mention, and I've mentioned it before, is if his blood evidence is in this crime scene, and that could very well be. We even had the great Barbara Butcher on Duty Run's show, Crime Time with Duty Run, saying that a murder like this with a knife of 4 people, she said there's like a 99.9% chance that he cut himself and his blood's in that crime scene. Ed Wallace, the great detective first degree from the NYPD crime scene that teaches crime scene techniques throughout the world, he said the same thing. So if that blood evidence is in that crime scene, you never say never. You never say it's over, because no one ever knows what a jury might do, So again, folks, this Monday night at 9 p.m., forensic psychologist, Dr. Joni Johnston, 9 p.m. on Police Off the Cuff. And I believe Professor Mike Geary is going to join me in interviewing Dr. Joni Johnston. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I just I wanted to go on the air when I saw this breaking news. And I want to thank all you guys, all your support, all the channel members, all the Patreon members. Lula Morocco, thank you for your generosity. And all you folks that support Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Have a great day, everyone, and God bless.
One episode